Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this basketball season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of stats, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and injury insurance on your picks are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million players who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/get100 and use code GET100. That's code GET100 at prizepicks.com/get100 for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.
You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night.
Welcome to the Jester Section Hiker Podcast, where we talk about the continual pursuit of the section hiker.
And I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Welcome back to Jester Section Hiker, the premier podcast with the spotlight on section hikers. I'm your host, Julie Jester Gayhart, and this is the podcast where you will hear stories about everyday people who, in addition to their everyday lives, make the commitment to hike long-distance trails where every section is a new beginning. I am back today with part 3 of the why, the way, and the will. If you are new to the podcast and this is your first time listening, I introduced a 3-part mini-series a couple episodes back, and today we will continue with part 3. The 3-part mini-series is based around our guest that went on a 3-year section hiking journey of the Eastern Continental Trail and beyond. In part 1 of the series, we focused on the why and learned who our guest is and why he took on such a monumental task. In part 2, the way, we heard Will's highlights of each of the trails that make up the ECT, and they were simply incredible. In today's final episode of the series, we will focus on a couple more trails Will completed and what Will is up to now. Before I reintroduce my guest today, I just wanted to remind everyone that from March 29th, 2017 to March 29th, 2020, my guest hiked 5,000 miles plus, 17 states, 22 degrees of latitude, 9 long trails, and a few hundred miles of country roads to connect them all. He completed the main section of the International Appalachian Trail, the Appalachian Trail, Benton MacKaye Trail, Pinhoti Trail, the Alabama Roadwalk, the Florida Trail, and the Key West Everglades Roadwalk to complete the Eastern Continental Trail. In addition to the trails that make up the ECT, he also completed the Bartram Trail, Foothills Trail, and the Palmetto Trail. He is extremely thankful for all of the trail organizations, maintainers, volunteers, hiking organizations, and trail angels that made this possible. I welcome all of you back to part 3 of the why, the way, and the will with section hiker Will Dukes, aka Tickbait. Welcome back to the podcast, Will.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, as you guys know, this is our 3rd and what I'm going to call the grand finale episode with Will. So I'm excited to have Will back. And as an educator, you guys know by now on the podcast, I like to recap and take a look back where we've been and then what we're going to talk about on this episode. So just so everybody knows, Will's ultimate goal was to have continuous footsteps with the Eastern Continental Trail. He left his home in Walhalla, South Carolina, and now with this 3rd episode, we are going to walk back to Walhalla, South Carolina. We know Will had some foot issues along the way, and he's going to recap for us at the end how he got better with his feet and what footwear he is wearing now. But before we finalize that, in our last episode, we'll hit the highlights of each one of the trails that encompasses the ECT, which was absolutely amazing. So if you haven't listened to that, please go back and listen to that. The stories about staying on the Amish farm in the rolling hills of the IAT, that was phenomenal. So today we are going to start off with, we're finally going to hear Will's voice. So Will, this is part 3. So lead us into year 3. And then I want to talk about how many people have actually done the ECT. So Will, take it away.
So year 3 was basically finishing up the parts of the ECT that I hadn't done. And that was basically Shenandoah National Park to the Everglades. And I was able to wrap that up in 2018 and the first 2.5 months of 2019 and the first couple months of 2020.
In which you actually ended up on your birthday. Is that correct?
Yep. Started on my birthday and ended on my birthday 3 years later.
So how cool was that to complete that continuous line of footsteps on your birthday? That had to have been a great feeling.
Yeah, it was. It buttoned up really nice, and walking out of my front door on my birthday, and then finishing up with the Palmetto Trail there by my birthday, and the 5,000 miles. It wrapped up into a nice little package.
Very nice. And one thing I thought about over the last couple episodes, and especially after recording the last episode, I remembered we have not talked about actually how many people have done this. And it's not very many. And I know it's an estimate. So talk about that a little bit.
So I was down at Billy Goat Days this year in January on the Florida Trail, which is the trail days of the Florida Trail. I think I mentioned that in the last episode. But we were talking about that there. And, those guys, they know the hikers that are coming through doing the ECT, and they get a lot of them. And a lot of the estimates were in the 30 people to 50 people range, and nobody's really sure. So there's a few more every year. I know there are at least 3 or 4 right now on the trail doing it. But I think it's safe to say I'm in the first, say, 30 to 50 to have done it.
And I think that's really cool because on one end, you got Nimble Wheel Nomad. And as far as we know right now, you're the most recent basically to finish. I know you got a couple buddies out there that are, either finishing up or, working on their section of it. So I think that's pretty cool too.
I hadn't thought about that. Yeah. and I'm one of the few people who sectioned it. There's a lot of through, because it is such a big trail. It attracts more experienced hikers, and so there's a lot of people who threw it, and but there are a handful of section hikers out there that have done it. So,
well, it's an amazing feat, and I know I've said that multiple times, but it's an amazing feat. But so you basically complete the ECT, but part of this continual footsteps deal was that, you created your own path from the get-go, and then you created your own path home. But in the meanwhile, you added 4 additional trails. You talked about the Benton MacKaye Trail before, but you actually went back and completed that trail, the Bartram Trail, the Foothills Trail, and then the Palmetto Trail. So let's talk about the finale of the Benton MacKaye Trail, so to speak. And I know that 73 miles of the Benton MacKaye is the ECT. So walk us through the rest of that trail. How many more miles did you have to go?
It's kind of, as section hiking is, we've talked about this. It's kind of complicated. My first section on the Benton MacKaye was,
to say the least,
right. Well, because you mentioned I was making my own way, and so when I left my home in 2017 to connect to the AT, I used a portion of the Benton MacKaye then. So I did 100 miles from people who've done the AT will be familiar with Fontana to Davenport Gap. So I'd done that section, and then I had done the 73 miles from Springer to the Pinhoti section, to the Pinhoti Trail. And so the last section was the central 120 miles from the Pinhoti to Fontana.
So how was that last section? Was it more of the Green Tunnel? Do you have a highlight of that section, or was it more like, okay, this is just part of me finishing this trail?
Well, that section of the Mackay Trail was, it was probably my favorite section of that trail. It's almost identical to the AT. That section in particular goes up to 5,000 feet in elevation, a little above. And so you get these nice views, very, very similar to the AT and the Smokies and north of there when you're on the North Carolina-Tennessee border. Really beautiful trail. And I loved it. Big rivers, big gorges, lots of wildflowers, and, just kind of the spitting image of the AT. As far as a highlight, I'd have to say I think it was called Bob Stratton Bald. Beautiful section. And, you can never get too much of that.
No, you can never get too much of any type of bald as far as I'm concerned. So,
yeah.
So that's perfect. So another trail that you did, which is another, I would say it's not a hidden gem. It's actually a gem of Western North Carolina, is the Bartram Trail. So talk to us about how long is the Bartram Trail and why was that important for you to take?
Well, so the Bartram Trail was another, like the beginning, the first section of the Mackay Trail that I did, that was part of that initial journey up to the AT. It was my own path getting into Tennessee from Walhalla. So the Bartram Trail connects to the Chattooga River Trail, which connects to the Foothills Trail, which connects to the Palmetto Trail, which is how I got there from my hometown. So it was on the way, and I did it. I did it to get to the Smokies. The Bartram Trail is 148 miles long, 37 miles in Georgia, and 111 in North Carolina. Or at the time that I did it, it was. I know they've changed a couple of sections, but it's another beautiful trail. It goes over the second highest peak in Georgia, and from that point, you can look east and you can see basically the entire Foothills Trail, and you can look west and you can see the entire beginning of the Appalachian Trail, and you can look north and see up into Franklin and points farther north. It's a really beautiful trail, and just kind of like I was saying with the Benton Mackay Trail, the spitting image of the AT.
And I know that it ends on Cheoah Bald right there at the Appalachian Trail. So is that the point where you actually got on the Appalachian Trail?
Yeah. So it ends right there at the NOC, just above the NOC at Cheoah Bald. And that's where I picked up the AT and went north to Fontana. And then at that time, took the Mackay Trail from there. So like you said, making my own path, kind of winding my way up trails. But the Bartram is a really beautiful trail, and if you don't want to hike in the bubble, a great option for giving you the AT experience without the crowds.
And I think it's a great trail. It's perfect. I've been on a little bit of it. I have not done that entire trail. And here again, we're going to talk about another not hidden gem, but I would call this trail a perfect shakedown hike trail. If you want to go out and, test your gear, see how your footwear is, see how you do 5-6 days out on the trail, maybe with no resupply, I think the Foothills Trail is where it's at. So talk to us. I know the Foothills Trail is in your backyard. So tell the listeners where that's at, how many miles?
The Foothills Trail is in my backyard, and it is got a special place in my heart. It was the first trail that I ever did a backpacking trip on, 4-day trip through Jocassee Gorges section, and it is a great trail. I love it, and it spoiled me for other trails because this trail is immaculately maintained and by some really dedicated trail workers. And there is a bridge over every little dip and little water source, just about. Now, that's kind of an exaggeration, but you don't have to get your feet wet on this trail unless it's flooding, basically.
And the footbridges on that trail, they're absolutely gorgeous. Like there's, I can't remember the name of it's not a swinging bridge, or it might be. It's actually one of the longer bridges right there at the river.
Mm-hmm.
And amazing bridge work on that trail.
Fantastic. Yeah, that one that you're talking about, I think, is over the Toxaway River. And
That's it.
Really long, beautiful bridge put in, I think, by Duke Power. Or a cooperation with the Foothills Trail folks. But yeah, it's quite a contrast to a trail like the Pinhoti or the Bent MacKay, where you're fording every day. You're fording rivers. And this trail, it's kind of a luxury experience as far as bridges go. But I love that trail. It's just about I think 76 to 80 miles long. I think somewhere in that range. And it goes over the highest point in South Carolina, 3,600 feet at Mount Sassafras, and really replicates the kind of terrain that you would experience on the AT pretty closely. And so as a shakedown hike, it's fantastic. But as a hike, as part of this, it was one that I wanted to do as building up for the AT. So I did that one right before I left to go north and head back down.
And that trail packs a punch too. I've only been on the eastern half of the trail. I think we determined before we started recording, and I don't remember a lot of switchbacks. I remember a lot of short, steep ups and downs, and then ups and downs. So it does pack a punch. It does give you a taste for long distance backpacking. That is for sure.
Absolutely, and it's pretty deceptive because the climbs. I think you have maybe one or two climbs in there that are in the 2,000 foot range. So you've got some AT-like climbs, but you've got an awful lot of climbs that are under 1,000 feet, but are quite steep. And so that can be deceptive if you look just at the elevation profile. But when you're hiking with a big pack, it can change your mind about how difficult you think it is.
And we all know you started with the big pack, Will. So
I finished with a big pack. I started with a really big pack, and I finished with a regular big pack. So
a regular big pack.
Yeah.
All right. So let's put the icing on the cake here. And this is the final trail that we are going to talk about that I think has a little place in your heart as well, the Palmetto Trail. And that's actually the trail that took you those final continuous footsteps to your home in Walhalla, South Carolina. And I do have to say that following you on that trail on your Instagram with all those beautiful pictures, it was fun. It was fun to see you, on that trail and finish. So talk to us about the Palmetto Trail. How many miles total is that? And then I guess walk us through your walk home.
So you're right. You're absolutely right. The Palmetto Trail does have a really special place in my heart. I grew up about 10 minutes away from the Oconee passage of the Palmetto Trail. And the Palmetto Trail is split into sections. It's not complete yet, but it's split into sections called passages. And there's this 3-mile passage about 10 miles from my home. And I grew up hiking and mountain biking that passage. And then when I decided to go on a longer hike, that was my go-to to put my pack on and get climbing up a mountain. It's almost 1,000 feet of elevation gain. And it was just my go-to trail for years and years. And now it's my go-to trail running trail. So it's still a big part of my life, but I love the Palmetto Trail and the idea of, traversing all the different types of terrain that are in this state. It's a really beautiful state, and it has really interesting transitions in terrain from Florida-like wetlands in the south to Appalachian Trail-like terrain in the north. But I started the Palmetto Trail right after I finished the ECT, so I had just enough time to pack this one in, and I figured, when is my next opportunity to do a long distance hike? When you do one of these, it's tempting just to hike forever. You can't do it. But I was making 20 miles a day steadily on the ECT on the Florida Trail there, and I figured I could finish in about 20 days.
Yeah, I remember you and I texting briefly back and forth, And I was like, yeah, you got trail legs, man. Do it. Stay out as long as you can. So why not? So yeah, that was fun interacting with you too, as you were, working on your finale, so to speak.
Yeah, it was, and it felt like the best opportunity that I had to do it cheaply. Because if I can make 20 miles a day, 20 plus miles a day for, 3 weeks, I can get it done versus losing my trail legs and then having to step back to 10 miles a day. Then we're talking closer to 2 months, or a month and a half. And that's just almost impossible once you get back into the working world. Unless you have a job that affords you great time off. So it was kind of a last second decision. I decided I'm gonna do this one, and I got a bus from Tallahassee to Charleston, and started out there. Beautiful trail. The parts that are finished are amazing. There were some roadwalk sections in between the passages, but I loved the transition from the low country to the sandhills, to the Piedmont, and then finally, out of nowhere, the Appalachian Mountains come out of the ground, and in the blink of an eye, virtually, you're on what could be mistaken for the Appalachian Trail. Really cool trail, and hiking it was kind of a dream of mine, and it did button up the journey really nicely, and because that Oconee connector that I hiked to prep for the ECT was the end point, basically. And I ended up walking from there, near there, back to my front door, and wrapping it up, kind of putting a bow on the whole thing.
Nice. Very nice. And again, listeners, if you could see Will describing this, I mean, I'm just watching Will, and I feel like we're literally at a campfire hanging out, and, you're telling us about this trail. So how many total miles is the Palmetto Trail with the passages?
So my hike of the Palmetto Trail was 433 miles.
That's longer than what I thought of. Okay.
Yeah. So, and it took, I think, 23 days, something in that neighborhood. There's one caveat. I did not hike the Fort Jackson Passage. The trail was built while Fort Jackson was still relatively accessible, but it takes a lot more planning than I had put in for. Like I said, I kind of did the trail on a whim, and with my hiking experience, I feel comfortable doing that because I've hiked a lot of miles on a lot of different trails, and I'm okay just kind of. I feel comfortable figuring it out as I go.
Yeah.
But with this trail in particular, there's that section that was through the military base that required the right timing and the right logistics and everything. So I did walk around that. I have a continuous line of footprints from Walhalla to Charleston, or Allendale, but I didn't get that passage. So whether it's technically
Will, that's okay, because we wouldn't know anyway. So there you go.
Well, I just want the listeners to know that I'm not being disingenuous out here and saying, so there is that section, that 16 miles that I walked around on state highways. But great trail. And if you take, and they're in development now, and they're going to be connecting a lot of those passages together, and hopefully, I hope for the sake of the state and for the sake of people out here having access to the trail and inspiration about the beauty of this state, I hope that a lot more people through hike that trail in the future, because it is a great trail and it has a really bright future.
So listen, how was it walking home? Okay, so most people, they get to a northern terminus, a southern terminus, and if we added it up, you've been to 18 terminuses if you're only counting the 9 trails of the ECT. So how was it walking what I'm going to call the home terminus? How was it? Did you just walk in the door and go, I'm ready to eat, or what happened?
It was surreal. It was really surreal. After having done all of that, it was, when you finish a trail, and I think anybody who's finished a long distance trail has the experience where you're in the mode of hiking, and you end up you're going basically full bore for days and days and days, weeks and weeks, whatever it is. And then you get to this sort of arbitrary point on a map and it's over.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that process had extended for 3 years of section hiking. So I wasn't hiking that whole time, but my entire life had revolved around supporting this dream. And you walk to this point on the map and bam, it's done. So it was surreal. It was mentally kind of confusing because there was a lot of joy, but there's also a lot of almost a mourning, kind of mourning this part of this chapter being over. So it was wild. And to be honest, I'm still kind of in that. It's still fresh because it was only a couple months ago.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. And how are you dealing with, and it has only been a couple months ago, so how are you dealing with being at home and not on the trail? Just kind of, continue what you were just saying.
Well, it's something that I have been aware of for a long time. When I started this, I didn't realize it was going to take so long to finish, but I knew that at some point this whole thing would be over and that I would have to transition into a more quote unquote normal existence, at least for a while. Maybe I'll do another one day, but and you do your best to mentally prepare yourself for this transition. But there's not much you can do. And it was especially abrupt for me because, I had gotten my trail legs and I'd gone just, like I said, full bore down through the Pinhoti, down through Alabama and the Florida Trail. And I decided to do the Palmetto Trail. And it was just like, all right, if I'm not doing 25 miles a day, I'm not happy. And I've got to get this thing done so I can get back to work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you're kind of not in this mindset where you're thinking, all right, what's going to happen when I finish? What am I going to do? So, after months of this just heavy focus and intensity of hiking, I got to the end and it was done. So what I decided to do, and one thing, I think if I could take one lesson from this whole thing, I would say that it's not some, spiritual lesson or some sort of, I didn't have this transcendental experience. I didn't, attain nirvana out there on the trail. There was no huge fundamental change in who I was, although there were some big shifts. But what I did learn about myself is that I'm happier when I'm outside, working with my body, spending time outside and getting my blood flowing and staying in nature. And when I'm around plants, when I'm out in the fresh air, that's where I'm happy, because I don't think I've been happier than when I was hiking. So with that in mind, my shift to real life has been, I do the 9 to 5 and then I hike every day and I hike, it's becoming a little less frequent, but I'm out there about 4 times a week doing miles to make sure that I'm still getting that experience, because that's the way that I feel guaranteed that I can still access that peace, that happiness, and that health and the vigor that comes from hiking.
So how about the intensity of your exercising? Has that gone down? I mean, obviously you're doing the 9 to 5. You're not hiking, 25 miles a day. So what is that exercise intensity now?
So what I've been doing, so I switched to trail running as soon as I got back, because I wanted the maximum, as far as economy of time is concerned, trail running is going to let you burn more calories and get more blood flowing than just walking. So when I got back, I kind of dove into that probably a little too enthusiastically, but I was really excited. Having walked 25 miles a day, 20 to 25 miles a day for months, left me with this cardio strength that was not necessarily geared towards high intensity stuff, but I could jog at a slow pace for, 8 hours. So I found that, with a little training, I got to that point. So when I got back, I was jogging every day and ended up doing, a 10K every, 5 days a week. When I was starting, I worked myself up to doing a 50K, which was, the pinnacle of my athletic achievement in my life. But I ended up doing a little too much, obviously. So I ended up dealing with some shin splints. So I've stepped it back now. I probably do a 10K twice a week, and I get on the elliptical, I get on my bike, but I'm still exercising 5 days a week. And so far, so good, fingers crossed. But I've been able to access that feeling that you get from doing it every day with a shorter time span. So that's my one key to staving off trail depression is to do that.
And I know, like any other hiker that is listening to this podcast right now, because I'm thinking about this as I'm listening to you, what trail's in your mind next? And like most hikers, there's probably 5, 6, 7 trails that are in your mind, but is there anything that stands out the most?
Well, to tell you, you're exactly right. Every trail that I hear of, I want to, I want to hike. There's a lot out there that I would love to do, but the trails, the trails on my mind right now. Well, my first challenge that I'd like to start getting into is something called the SB6K. That's the South Beyond 6,000. It's
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know if we talked about that on the podcast or not, but climbing all the 6,000 foot peaks in the Appalachians. That's not exactly a trail, but it is a great challenge. The Art Loeb Trail.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
30.
Well, you'll knock that out in like 2 days. I mean, you'll get that. That's no problem.
A friend I met from the Florida Trail actually contacted me and wanted to do a 24-hour yo-yo. And I was like, I was excited that I did do the 50K, but there's no way I could do basically a little over 100K in 24 hours. But I have thought about doing that in, 2 or 3 days might be fun, to do a yo-yo at the Art Loeb. But the one that's been really calling to me, one that's been really calling to me for a long time is the Superior Lake Trail. I want to do that one so bad. And I think that might be either a part of the North Country Trail or a spur of the North Country Trail.
The Superior Hiking Trail.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. It's actually all part of the North Country Trail.
Yeah, I want to do that one so bad. And
it's like 320 miles, I think, or 310. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was thinking, I could do it I could do a section of it, or I could do the whole thing. I could probably do it in, 2.5 weeks if I was still in shape. But, that's something you have those dreams of maybe I'll do it this year. But
yeah, you never know, Will. Come on.
You never know. I doubt I'll get to one that long this year. But yeah, those are the ones that have been on my mind quite a bit. And of course, there's the sections of the Appalachian Trail that are calling my name, like that section between Gorham and Andover. I want to do that again so bad. And the Bigelows, all those things I'd love to do again. So
well, Will, you have definitely transitioned. And you showed me a couple pictures of yourself at the very beginning of your hike 3 years ago versus, kind of what you look like now. And you have gone through a major physical transition. And then your mental transition, I would say, is, hey, you learned you want to be outside, you need to be active. You need to keep your brain going towards, hey, what's the next trail, that kind of thing. So you've definitely been through some transformation. And I think the listeners are going to hear that as we wrap up this episode and the previous episodes as well. And I would love to see the Will now go back and conquer Maine in a different way than the Will that told us that story in that first episode. So that would be tremendous. And if you do that, I want you to come back and tell us about it.
Oh, I'd love to. I'll keep you posted.
Yes, most definitely. So before we wrap this up, because I know the listeners are going to be interested, so let's go back to your gear real quick, because I know you told us about kind of what you started off with. You had a big pack, so and you ended with a smaller, bigger pack. That's what we'll say. So,
Yeah.
what actual pack were you carrying when you finished?
So I carried. I ended up using the Deuter. I think that's how you pronounce the name. Deuter. I think it was Air Contact. It's a big pack, and it's a tank, and it's the only pack that I've found that does not rip apart under the absurd weight that I had been putting on it. So I love that pack. Air Contact. I think I think mine was, I think that's what it was. It was 65 plus 10. Big pack, very big.
Big pack. So it could
Big
carry
pack.
basically 75 liters.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that does come in handy sometimes on these smaller trails where you might not have a convenient resupply for a while. And if you don't have trail legs, you might be 7 days from your next resupply point. So it comes in handy in those instances.
All right. So the pack was a Deuter.
Mhm.
What tent did you end up with? Was it the tent you went through 4 different ones?
Yeah, I started with the Passage 1, the REI Passage 1, I think, which is a great beginner tent, not a great tent for using every night because it broke on me a lot. And then I switched to Big Agnes tents after that. And, went through the Fly Creek and the Copper Spur. My last tent was a Copper Spur UL2 that I got on discount and loved the tent. It's probably my favorite tent. I really like the Copper Spur, the 1-man, but the 2-man is good. I can drag my pack in there, and yeah, it's good. I love that tent.
And what about your sleeping bag? I can't remember what you said about that.
The sleeping bag was probably the one thing that stayed constant throughout the whole hike was that sleeping bag. It was a Mountain Hardwear Pinole 20 or Pinole or Pinole. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but it's a synthetic bag. Pretty much entry-level mummy bag.
And that's interesting that you carried a synthetic bag.
Yeah, it was cheaper. So that was my big thing. And I didn't carry a sleeping bag for 800 miles on the trail. I didn't carry a sleeping bag from Key West to White Springs, Florida. So that was probably my most consistent piece of gear because I carried it the rest of the way.
Now, what did you use instead? Did you use what did you use? Did you wrap up in a sheet or nothing?
I had 2 sleeping bag liners.
A sleeping bag, okay.
And I had an emergency bivvy, and then I had my rain gear. And I would not recommend, for anybody considering the Florida Trail, I would not recommend that setup at all. You can get away with it, but there were some nights that got down in the 30s where I was very uncomfortable. So I never felt like I was in danger, but I was cold. And if you're ever in that kind of situation, if you feel like you're shivering, you get up, you start hiking, and especially in a place like Florida where it's not going to dip down into the single digits or below 0. So.
Well, Will, you just talked me right out of that, so don't worry about that.
Carry a sleeping bag.
I will always carry a sleeping bag. And I get a lot of grief for not having a quilt either. So,
Oh, listen, I'm the last kind of person to give anybody grief over their gear choices. I am not a gear snob. I am a do what works person.
Where you go.
Yeah.
So what worked for your final shoe resolution? Because everybody listening to this knows you had the foot issues.
Oh. So
what did you end up? What are you walking in now or running in now?
My and that's what the shoe really helps with that too. But I told you the story of meeting that guy at Boiling Springs, and he told me that Hoka, the speed goats, were what saved his feet. And I switched those and never looked back. They have been, and they're not for everybody. People love the 0 drop shoes and they love all those other ones, and that's fine. Whatever works for you. The Hoka speed goats work for me like a charm, and I have had 0 foot issues since I got them. And so we're talking stress fractures and flexor tendonitis, And, I say I've had 0 foot issues. I've had some, I've had Achilles tendonitis and some things like that. But yeah, the Hokas seem to be the magic touch. So before I got the Hokas, my longest section was about 1,000 miles. And after I got the Hokas, I did 2,500 miles without looking back. So that was the limiting factor was always my feet issues. So they cured it.
And 2,500 miles, I would say that shoe works for you, is what I would say.
It works. Yeah. It works pretty well. Yeah. And that's a long section.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a section that's longer than the AT itself. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I know the listeners will be interested in this, and I'm interested in this as well, because I would say the food part of hiking is my least favorite. And what I mean by that is I don't spend any time. I'm just not interested. And I know that's probably one of the most important things that you need to deal with as a hiker, but I just go straight to the junk food, don't do resupply boxes. So I know people will be interested to know, how did you start off with this? What was your mindset with resupply, and how did you end with resupply?
Well, I was one of those guys who started out like planning my meals to a T for every mile. So coming south from the Maine, New Brunswick border, I had every resupply planned out all the way to Gorham, New Hampshire. So my dad and I, we drove up in a rental car and dropped off resupply boxes at hostels and different places along the way, all the way up from Gorham. I think it was Rattle River Hostel is where our first box was, all the way up through the Notch and on up into Maine with I think the Stratton Motel and Shaw's and all those guys, Mattagamon Wilderness Camp, all the way up to the border. And after having done that and put all of that work into it, you realize that your plans don't always go according, things don't go according to plan. And it's just not necessary to do that. It just really isn't necessary to put all of that thought and to plan everything to a T, especially when there's basically 100% chance that your plans are not going to work out. So I slowly evolved from these homemade dehydrated kind of meals with everything planned out to doing grocery store resupplies. And that's where I kind of landed, was on grocery store resupplies. And, I ended up switching to stoveless. And so, that changed everything. But I got to the point where I could do a full resupply for, say, 5 days for about $35 or $40 at a Dollar General. And it consisted of, oatmeal and tuna packs and the healthiest stuff that you can get. Still not great, but the healthiest stuff that you can get. Carnation instant breakfast and oatmeal was the bottom of my food pyramid. So the AT is geared towards helping hikers out. There's a resupply point. You can get everything you need all the time. These other trails, they don't even know that most of the people don't even know there's a trail going through there. So, my resupply situation changed from, this planned out thing to kind of, you get to a place where you resupply, you look at your next resupply point on the trail, you get enough food to get you there, and you go there.
Yeah.
And then when you get to that next point, you look at the trail and see where your next one is. And that's how I ended up. And that's a much more comfortable place for me. And it's a much more realistic place because things might change. And, I usually grabbed maybe a little extra food so that if I was delayed or something. But I got to the point where I could eat out of a gas station or a Dollar General pretty easily.
Now, did you get like a massive hiker hunger, like you were starving all the time? Did that ever hit, or?
Yeah, that started to happen on my on the second longest section, the 1,000 mile section. I had a really big hiker hunger, and then this last one, and my biggest, I think that really kicks in right around 1,000 miles, and but probably to an extent a little less than there, but yeah, after I had gotten down to Florida and was doing 20-mile days in Florida, and then you're just doing 20 miles every day, you can't really take in enough calories. And the hiker hunger kicks you. You're hungry in your bones. You know, your arms are hungry and your legs are. You know, I can't tell you how visceral the experience of hunger is when you're in that state, and it's kind of uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable, but it's interesting. It definitely kicked in for me.
Well, that is definitely a great place to end the visceral hunger of Will's ECT.
Yeah.
Listen, Will, I really can't thank you enough for
thank you.
Coming on here, being part of this first mini series of the podcast. I mean, you have amazed us all from episode 1 all the way until now. You have definitely changed. And I hope you become a friend of the podcast. And this is not the last time people are going to hear from you, because I know amazing things. You're going to be out there doing amazing hikes, and I'm not going to let you forget about us. So I think we've come to a great point in the podcast where Will is going to do his final sign off for us by reading his own journal entry, statement, or quote that will inspire us all to keep hiking section by section.
Well, thanks for that. And I know that we'll be chatting soon. Hopefully a lot more hiking in the future. So this next thing, this is a bit of a reflection on the end of my trail, and it kind of speaks to the experience that we chatted about earlier about coming home. So the sun began to set 28 miles into my last day on the Palmetto Trail. I was bone tired. I had made my way from the neighboring county, connecting the last 3 passages of the trail in one big final push. I was struggling to find my way in the dark. I followed my headlamp beam up an old Forest Service road to the top of a ridge, glancing down at maps on my phone to see how I could connect to the last open section of trail. I looked up from my phone and saw the lights of my hometown below the mountain. I had seen the twinkling lights of distant towns all the way down the East Coast from Maine to Alabama. I had seen dozens of them. This was just like any other in almost every way, but the significance was so much greater. Somewhere in that sea of lights was my home. As soon as I made my way down that mountain, my journey would be over. Strangely enough, in all my years, I had never seen my town from that mountain. I was seeing it with new eyes, and I was seeing my future with new eyes. I was face to face with the end of a chapter. I had known for 3 years that this moment would come, but I was slow to feel the gravity of it. I turned my headlamp off and sat there in the confusion of simultaneous joy and sadness. I let it soak in for a few minutes and then pressed on to the terminus. It would take weeks to sink in, and in some way, it still feels unreal. And that kind of speaks to, summing up the experience of section hiking, something so big, and that abrupt finish that we talked about. And it still doesn't feel, it feels kind of dreamlike, but I'm glad to have done it, and excited to, do the next one.
All right, Will, I really appreciate you being on. Thank you very much. And we are definitely going to keep connected.
Great. I'm looking forward to it.
I hope all of you have enjoyed this 3-part mini-series as much as I did with Will. The Eastern Continental Trail is a monumental task to complete, and Will is now part of a small group of individuals that have literally walked the entire East Coast of the United States. Will may have had some setbacks because of his feet, but not finishing this was never an option. And I really admire the completion of continuous footsteps from your home in Walhalla, South Carolina, back home again as you finished the Palmetto Trail, looking down on the city lights of your hometown. Congrats, Will. Job well done. Thanks for listening, everybody. And as always, happy section hiking.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through through the darkness of the night, heading toward the morning light. I wonder if you'd wander with me, and I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods. You're wondering if I go wandering with you, what kind of trouble we'll get ourselves into. Would it be wrong to tag along with a band of vagabonds? You wonder if I'd wander with you. So I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods. I'm wondering if you'd come wandering my way, if you ever get lost or if the trail leads you astray. The music of the pack can always bring you back. I wonder, can we wander away? And I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. Round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this football season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of statistics, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and an enormous selection of players and stat options are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million football fans who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/get100 and use code GET100. That's code GET100 at prizepicks.com/get100 for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.